I'm very happy to introduce our next speaker. One of the co-organizers at this point of the Milwaukee Stoic Fellowship, as I mentioned as well. If you're interested in the walk and talks, it's getting a little cold for them now, but you might be interested in that come spring, right?
Yeah, I think I'll still do some this fall. I was just out of town for the last 3 weeks.
You're very adventurous. So Dan is going to talk about Stoicism and meditation. And we'll go for 20-25 minutes of talk, and then any question and answers. We're going to try to keep on track so that we don't miss lunch. I think all of you are invested in that idea. So I'm just going to turn it over to Dan right now.
So first I want to say my thanks to Greg and Andy for putting on this Stoicon-X, as well as our mysterious benefactor, whoever he or she may be. So the topic of this talk is meta-meditations and Stoic universal love, an interdisciplinary search for spiritual exercises. While studying, I like to branch out into other disciplines that I feel might have merit and insight to eudaimonia, or a good and fulfilling life. That is the project. We are here to find a path that leads to a fulfilling life, a life of tranquility and of mind, and a sense of purpose fulfilled. And so, I offer up the Stoic path, but I would not deny the thoughts and ideas of other traditions if they hold insights into what is useful. We are social creatures, and we have desires to find tools to deal with other people in a sound and useful way, wherever we may find them. Now, some of this would say that, like Seneca says in his letters to Lucilius, that you shouldn't be spreading your learning out too much. He's like, stick to the Stoic fundamentals and don't have such a breadth. But I feel like that was mostly a thought that was trying to be pushed towards someone that was just first learning the basics of the philosophy. And now with a more grounding of the basics of the ideas, I feel like I can explore just a little bit. So, to follow the Stoic path requires both theory and a lot of praxis, or dedicated action based on the chosen theory. The praxis is needed in order to realize that equanimity and virtue of the Stoics. Our praxis is based on Stoic spiritual exercises. Spiritual exercises is a term that is coined by the French philosopher and master of exegesis Pierre Hadot. It is defined as practices intended to effect a modification and a transformation in the subjects who practice them, of which premeditato malorum and the view from above are good Stoic examples. And we talked about that a little bit with Kevin as well. We can gain some insights into bringing about these effects in the practitioners of the spiritual exercises. From Anders Ericsson, who is well known for his book Peak, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. In his work, Ericsson puts forth the idea that extended deliberate practice to become an expert in any discipline. Backed up by mountains of data, Ericsson argues that deliberate practice, defined as motivated learning with well-defined goals, getting feedback from his performance, and has ample opportunities for repetition, is the basis. Over the heuristic time period of about 10,000 hours is the key factor in developing this excellence. Stoicism, as a deliberate practice, claims to bring equanimity and eudaimonia, or as Epictetus says, it molds and constructs the soul. It orders our lives, guides our conduct, shows us what we should do and what we should leave undone. Without it, no one can live fearlessly or in peace of mind. Or as Cicero, summarizing the early Stoic Chrysippus, wrote, the art concerning with the cure of therapy, or therapy of the soul, is philosophy. In other words, the art to cure the mind of the false beliefs that result in the faulty judgments that cause unwelcome emotions. Here I found the extant Stoic spiritual exercises to be lacking in their ability to prepare one for some of the tenets of the theory, specifically the idea of okiosis, or Stoic universal love. The idea of okiosis starts with the idea that we are born with concern for ourselves and our mother, and soon to be joined by our father. And this is a series of interlocking circles. Wherein you start out with you and your mom and dad, and then you have your family and your city, and now you have the universe of rational creatures, and this is in the very center here is you and your mom and dad, and this is our most basic level of concern. And then as time goes on, we create new circles of concern: our close family, our extended family, our neighborhood, and our city, our state, and finally the universe of rational creatures. Our highest level of concern is our central circle. And there is diminishing levels of concern every time that we go up a level of the circle. The act of okiosis is to contract the circles so that we take the concern of all rational people and bring them to the place where you have the same concern that you would have for yourself and your direct immediate family. This is the process of becoming a cosmopolitan, a citizen of the world. This is similar to the work of Peter Singer in his book, The Expanding Circle. He argues that altruism, when directed to one small circle, a family, tribe, or even a nation, is not moral, but it becomes so when applied to the wider circles. This happens because of human capacity for reason, which generalizes or universalizes our altruistic tendencies beyond groups we are biologically inclined to be altruistic to. As such, reason is not the opposite of emotion and instinct, but instead builds upon it. The problem is that this idea is hard to fathom and even more difficult to practice. Unlike many of the other points of Stoic theory, the extant works are of little help here. Enter the Buddhists, who have an unbroken tradition over the last 2,500 years and happen upon some of the same ideas that the Stoics did. Their tradition has more extant original writings and billions of more followers over the years. They have many spiritual exercises that can be of use. Many of their spiritual exercises focus on meditation and the many subsets therein. Within the Buddhist tradition, there's a practice called Metta meditation, or loving kindness meditation. Metta meditation is practiced by sitting and bringing forth the feeling of loving kindness for an individual that you already have no problem feeling love for. And then you try to maintain that emotional state of love while you start to think about someone who you just might like and not quite love, The idea is to mentally associate the emotional state of love to those who don't already feel that loving feeling for. It becomes more challenging when you get to the next level, when you then try to associate that loving kindness to those who you feel indifferent towards, and then to feel that same loving kindness for those that you may even hate. This is a contracting of the circle by way of Hume's idea that emotion is the source of morality, that we can use the Stoic positive emotion of wish in order to produce a rational concern for all rational creatures, a wish of cultivating a cosmopolitan view of the world. Now, if you're under the impression that the Stoics deny emotion, that we're these stip off our lips, that, screw anything that could happen to us, then I would then refer to you to the psychiatrist Aaron Beck, and the father of cognitive behavioral therapy. When he wrote on the subject, The notion of Stoicism as a kind of intellectualism opposed to emotion is a popular misconception. Stoicism has traditionally attempted to accommodate emotion, especially the primary philosophical emotion of rational love towards the existence as a whole. And now, this was just like this idea that Buddhism had insights into the theories that are expounded in Stoicism was just the tip of the iceberg for me. The idea that one can find spiritual exercises outside of Stoicism that bring forth mental states that are described in the theory lead to surprising places. So Stoic spiritual practices are great, but they are a product of their time. Most have to do with self-contemplation, looking within and practicing a situation in which you can react to in a Stoic way in order to have those mental tools at hand for the real-world encounters. Practice makes permanent, but some practices are better than other. Virtual reality researcher Jeremy Bellinson's research lab his research has led him to the conclusion that people learn by doing, getting feedback on mistakes, and then repeating and iterating. Doing is better than trying to picture the things in your head, but many Stoic practices are impossible to do ourselves, like the view from above. Many other are incredibly impractical, like memento mori or premeditata malorum. This is within the context of like real-world experiences. Until now, we could not have our own personal experiences with the ghost of Christmas future or interaction with Clarence upon the bridge as Scrooge and George Bailey were gifted to experience. Death and a world without us. We could not experience over and over the bad things that may befall us on a daily basis. The practice of interacting with rude persons over and over in our mind's eye in order to become dispassionate to the experience gives us very little feedback due to the nature of it all residing in our mind. So, enter Professor Jeremy Bellinson's research into virtual reality at Stanford University and the company spun out of that lab, like this company Striver. There is now empirical evidence that virtual experiences can produce significantly better acquisitions of skills over just reading about how to do a task or watching a video of someone doing that task and trying to emulate it. From such experiences that are difficult or expensive to experience in the real world, virtual reality is a major boon. Striver is a company that gives football QBs and linebackers a 360 video recreation of plays that they can practice recognizing what the play looks like before the ball is even snapped. Over at Verizon, the tech is used to train Verizon employees on how to deal with armed robbery in order to reduce physical harm. Yeah, it's all those things that are just really difficult to have happen in any other sort of circumstances. A training scenario that would be rather difficult and expensive to stage in the real world, but with VR, the experience can be run over and over for a very low cost. The training techniques fits in perfectly with Anders Ericsson's writings on deliberate practice. The VR technology allows for deliberate practice of usually impractical or impossible scenarios that bring the well-defined goals, feedback, and ample chances for repetition. The VR experience have also been used as a complement to cognitive behavioral therapy and exposure therapy for those who are suffering from PTSD. 35 to 40% of people who do not respond to the standard narrative-based imagery therapy used in CBT and exposure therapy. Joanne DeFede, a specialist in anxiety disorder at Cornell's Well Medical College, pioneered a use of VR for use in PTSD in response to the 9/11 attacks. The experience was one where you are standing at street level and you can look up and you see the towers, and the therapist goes through and tries to create an experience, and they have at their fingertips the ability to manually change the variables of like the time, before the first is hit, after the first one hit, after the second one hit, and when the towers come down, as well as to add in or take out other audio or physical like fans and whatnot to give you some sort of tactile feedback in order to try to elicit that experience in a very visceral way and to go through the bases of exposure therapy outside of just trying to recreate that in your own mind. The result of the initial case study was with 6 sessions in VR. The patient showed an 83% reduction in symptoms of depression and a 90% reduction in symptoms of PTSD. The therapy was used on over 50 more people who were suffering from PTSD from the events of 9/11, with significant statistical and clinical improvements over the baseline of mental narrative exposure therapy. So, this brings us back to the Stoic practices that are already several applications that can be used as a VR analog to the practice of the view from above. Examples are overview, named after the overview effect, and space engine, but the piece de resistance from my own experience is Google Earth VR. And I just realized that not everyone might know what the view from above is. So the view from above is a Stoic spiritual exercise that says, okay, you are in this place and you think about an interaction that you're having, and you are so caught up in that one-on-one interaction that like you're not seeing the forest for the trees, you're not seeing anything. You're all in your mind, and the idea is to take a step back and pull yourself up to a hawk's eye view and be 100 feet up in the air and look down at yourself and whatever you're interacting with at the moment and say, does this thing that I think is so important actually matter at all at this moment in time? And it's a lot easier to do that from when you're imagining yourself at 1,000 feet up, or 100 feet up, or 1,000 feet up, or several miles up. And then you can extend this to, the beginning of time and to the end of time. And it's like, is any of this as important as I think it is at this particular moment in time? So, while Google Earth does not allow for the zooming out to see the entirety of our solar system or even the Milky Way like the first two do, it does allow you to start from the street where your house stands as a 3D model and then slowly zoom out to the point where one can see the entirety of the Earth. It's a really very engrossing experience. This is part of the idea of the overview effect, which is sometimes referred to as earth gazing, which is the idea or the experience that has been described by many astronauts as they are sitting orbiting the Earth and they realize how small and the borders that we have defined for ourselves about our world are just illusions, and that this is such a small and potentially fragile space that we have to kind of transcend certain political and tribalistic ideas about how we interact with the world. And so Google Earth gives you the ability to go basically anywhere on the Earth. I've gone to Grand Teton National Park. I've gone to North Korea. I've gone to Hawaii. I've gone to the Great Wall of China. And you can go down and you can go to like Street View or just like hovering a couple feet over the ground and then zoom out and then see the entirety of the Earth, and you can have it rotate and you can see it go from day to night cycle, and it's just this really kind of centering and calming effect that you can get from this experience. Or you can also kind of think about it like if you're familiar with the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, there's this idea of the total perspective vortex, which takes you and then pulls it back from to show you the entirety of the galaxy. And the whole idea is to say, hey, look how insignificant you are. He described it as torture, but who knows? I think it's kind of fun. He being Douglas Adams, obviously. The idea going forward is to use these VR tools in service of Stoic goals. We can build scenarios that we once locked away in one's imagination alone. Imagine a world where we can practice premeditatum malorum with an interactive jerk who tries his darndest to push your buttons. I am reminded of a video of a gentleman who got into a fender bender with a very angry U.S. Marine who is absolutely consumed by that anger. The difference is night and day between the two men. And I will illuminate this with the said video. So, if you can see, I hope you can, I've turned off the audio because the amount of profanity is extreme. But as you can see, he is very, very angry, and he just wants him to get out of the car so he can fight him. And if you can see the driver, he is sitting there and making absolutely no expression. And so I feel like this is a really good example of, turning away from that anger that could be there. He's insulting him, insulting his girlfriend, who is also a Marine, and just using every slur that he can possibly use to try to elicit a reaction from him. And nothing happens, and so I've got to praise him. But the idea here is that we could create some sort of experience where this happens to you. You could sit in that car and you could have a virtual guy come and just hurl insults at you to just, rattle off anything that you could even choose, okay, what's the one thing that most makes me lose my calm composure, and just dial that up so you're exposing yourself to when these things might happen in real life, that you are already found the dispassionate ways that you can deal with them. So imagine that you had the ability to experience that for yourself in first person, to sit in the seat of the car and watch as he rages and wants to cause you harm. I am convinced, based on the research of Professor Bellinson, that an experience like this would be an effective tool in practicing how to stay calm in a tense and a provoking event. A virtual premeditatum malorum, if you will. A library of these experiences could be built in order to practice a wide range of common negative events to expand the practice, from anger to loss and frustration and boredom. This is all in service to our main goal of eudaimonia. Let us seek out new spiritual practices wherever they may be found. Like that. I could have been really angry there, but it just happens. Find new spiritual practices wherever they may be found, and to seek to create new ones based upon the skills and the technology at our disposal. As a virtual reality game developer that I am, this has become my new pet project. I have the skills and the will to build something and can help my fellow man. I will need to dig deep in service to my love for all rational beings and put forth that which needs to be made. And if you have any ideas of potentially negative experiences, I'm all ears. So, thank you all very much. That was my talk.
I got a couple of things. One's just a quick comment about, because I used to have some VR headsets.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've ever played VR chat,
Yep.
if that's a fantastic gauntlet
Mm-hmm.
for this type of, getting rattled up by random people. Those are real people too.
Yeah.
So that's funny to me. And then I guess I have a question that I put down. Could you elaborate some more on what eudaimonia is and how perhaps meditation can help cultivate that condition?
So eudaimonia is the idea, it's sometimes just translated as happiness, but I like the translation of like a fulfilling life. a little bit better because I feel it kind of conveys the idea better. And so this is the idea that within Stoicism, if you practice your virtue, then that will result in you having a eudaimonic life. And this is also the kind of the basis of many of the ancient schools of philosophy. The Aristotelians were doing this, the Epicureans were looking for this, the Stoics were looking for this, the Cynics were further looking for this, and they all have slightly different ideas on how you achieve it. Aristotle said that virtue is good, but also you need some money and some good friends and some good food. The Cynics are like, all you need is virtue, and you should be an ascetic about everything else. Everything else is just pulls you away from virtue. The Epicureans are pleasure good, pain bad. And if you find a tranquility within that, like a kind of a mean within there, then you are living a good life. But they also removed themselves from society and lived in their little garden. The Stoics are like, okay, we need to live in society because we're social creatures, and that's just how we are. Okay, kind of go to what Aristotle's man is a political animal, that we are always in interaction with other people. And so the Stoics said the only thing that is in itself a good are the virtues, but that doesn't mean that you should be an ascetic to everything else. So you can have nice things as long as none of the nice things that you have are ever traded, or is that you never trade any of your virtues for any of those nice things. I feel like there was a second part to that question that I didn't quite hit on.
I added on how you can implement or how meditation would fit into that.
I guess the idea is that in order to do virtuous actions, you should take into account those people in the world of all rational creatures. And the more virtue that you can do that, the more that you bring yourself towards eudaimonia. John, you had a question?
How do you actually, or how often do you practice the metta meditation in your practice?
I don't know, whenever the app kind of pulls it up. Yeah, I've got, there's an app called Waking Up. It's a meditation app. And sometimes they do metta, but most of it is either mindfulness or Dzogchen. There's no head. Yes?
One idea is you can always start with momental jacket, just the gunnery sergeant.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Yeah, just have someone just yell at you at very, very close amounts of range. Yeah. Okay, just let me add that really quick.
What was the app that you mentioned that you wake up to?
It's called Waking Up. And there's a number of different meditation apps out there. I just happen to have found that one worked for me.
Thank you.
Yes.
Do you think Stoicism is having some sort of new revival within the past several years? And if so, what?
Yes, absolutely. You're all here, right? Why? There's just
About past 20 years, I'd say.
yeah. It's been growing. I think we're just at a point where there's starting to get some mass behind it.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyone else have?
I have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
Last year, I was fortunate to go to Stoicon in London, and one of the people there was talking about having been a studier of Stoicism for many years from I can't remember, one of the keynote speakers was talking about being involved in this back when nobody else cared about it.
Was it long?
Probably, yes. And he said it was just amazing to him the way this has taken off in the last couple decades.
Yeah.
Nobody would have thought this would happen back in the 60s.
It seemed like that since, I can't pronounce his last name, you probably know Massimo?
Massimo Picanucci.
Yeah, so it seems like it
No
kind of
G.
picked up around when he had his blog, and
No, he got
published
into it
some
because
books.
it was already picked up.
What was that?
He got into it because it had already picked up.
Oh, okay. That
Yeah,
was, I'm sorry, that was my first
Yeah, he
interaction.
came into the movement about the same time I did. And it's earlier people like Donald Robertson, Lawrence Becker, those people who were doing a lot of, Chris Gill, they were sort of doing the foundation work. Massimo's been great for popularizing things. So he's a dynamic speaker, prolific writer. So but it's been churning along, sort of like gaining momentum over the last 20 years.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think Stoicism resonates with people today?
Because it works. because there's a huge hunger out there. And this is part of, Kevin can talk about this as well. We're public speakers. One reason why we can talk about, philosophy to ordinary people is because ordinary people want something that has substantive, you could say, something substantive engagement with ideas that actually connects with real life. And that need is not being met by universities. They're doing a terrible job at it. It's not being met by the popular culture, which also does a terrible job with that sort of thing. So it's getting met by people who, go out and just talk about it. And when you do it, provided you don't alienate your audience, they click like that. So it's being applied in athletics and military and corporate settings, and people trying to use it for improving their resilience.
Big in tech in Silicon Valley.
Yeah, it's so it's gaining traction because it works in some ways. It's not to say that it's like the only approach that works. Dan was just talking about some of the other sort of philosophies of life out there. There's a neo-Epicurean movement too, smaller than the Stoic movement, but it's out there. There's neo-Aristotelians. I think there's an awareness now that if you want your life not to suck, it's up to you. Do something about it. And one of the great insights of virtue ethics in general is we have some measure of agency over how we feel and what we think. Rather than just blaming it on somebody else, we can say, well, what do I want to work on? So I'm very interested in this VR stuff because it seems like it's got great potential for maximizing that.
And I guess I'd also add in, there's been popularizers. We're talking about Ryan Holiday. He's definitely a popularizer, as well as Tim Ferriss is a very large crowd of people that follow him, and he's been a really big proponent as well. So, whenever people with big audiences start to push it out there, it gets a little bit more interest. And thanks for Donald Robinson and all the other people and Christopher Gill for actually having some really good concrete books to work with.
Yeah, and I do want to recommend Margaret Graver's work too. She's really good, and she's done a lot of translation work. And if you want to know about Stoicism and the emotions, she is the go-to person on that. So.
What was her name again?
Margaret Graver. Yeah.
Yes.
At what point do you think simulated exposure to situations that you want to avoid, or whatever it would be, vulgarity through a car window? At what point do you think that might hold diminishing returns?
I don't know until I try. Who knows? There's going to be some therapies and experiences that are probably just not going to work for a subset of the population. So I would never say that it's going to be 100%, but I think that there's a good enough parallel research to say that there is a good chance that this has some really useful applications. Yes, in the back?
I appreciated your discussion about Google Maps and zooming in. I had an experience. I worked for a major airline and was called out on Christmas Eve and couldn't be with my family. And I think I was not leaning myself to good judgment and resiliency and et cetera. But as we were flying into Albuquerque, the entire city was wrapped in luminarios and on all the rooftops and on up and down the streets. And as I looked out the window, I could honestly feel a shift in all of my emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm sure I had a stoic moment.
I don't think it's only a Stoic moment, but just, yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing. Bob?
Do you see Stoicism and Zen Buddhism as being real similar, just different cultures?
I'm not super familiar with all of the points within Zen Buddhism. I definitely see that there's an overlap in a lot of the ideas, especially with like having thoughts and your perceptions about the thoughts being one of the major core reasons why we are upset about things. So that's kind of the reason why I was drawn to at least starting to learn about Buddhism, that there was that overlap. And I guess I found the book Why Stoicism Is True by...
Buddhism is true.
Sorry, you're right. Is it... What? Did I say Stoicism?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Why Buddhism is True by Robert Wright. It's a really interesting look at it from a neuroscience perspective, and he talks about all the things within Buddhism that he thinks can be backed up by some neuroscience research that we have nowadays. Yeah, John?
Is there a Stoicism app yet? And if not, why not? It's a great source of revenue.
There are some, but none of them have been very good.
Okay.
They're all and Dan can probably talk more about this, but my impression is people, because Stoicism has become a popular going concern, you get people who are like, I'm going to make some money on this. I'm going to put out an app, and it'll be, it's going to trick, like the app people always say, it's going to change everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it, and then you're like, okay, so you got some quotes there, coming up each day. And I think it's a great untapped market, but there hasn't been a good connection between like app developers and people who really, I would say, understand the philosophy. That hasn't had the traction yet. I mean, what do you think?
The only one that I found that was even halfway decent was this, I think it's called The Stoics, and it just gives you a quote a day from either the three biggies, as well as they've got Musonius Rufus and some stuff from Cicero's writings about Stoicism. But it's also got it's just laden with ads. So. Yeah, I was like, oh, this is halfway decent content, but, Exactly.
We can do one more question.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm looking at your concentric circles on the board there. And,
yeah.
Okay, with expanding the circle. I'm good with expanding my circle to those far outside of it, yet my natural tendency is to give preference to those toward the center of my circle, my family, and those closer to me. Is Stoicism good with that?
So you're talking about in-group bias, and we've all got it.
Yes.
And the idea is to kind of the opposite of that is to bring in the amount that we concern about everyone, and when you're making our decisions, to try to bring that to the same concern that you would for your innermost in-group bias. It's just kind of an idea of knowing that we're all part of this community, that we work together like the right hand and the left, or the upper and the lower sets of teeth.
So my natural tendency is to attend to my family first.
Yeah, that is the human condition. But the idea is that we can use rationality to try to expand that level of concern to more and more people.
All right.
All right. Thank you.